Alright, so in this video, I wanted to talk about how to know when to make changes to your diet, or your cardio, or your steps, or your targeted workouts, or essentially the variables that you can manipulate in order to achieve a faster rate of fat loss. Essentially, throughout a fat loss diet, you will find periods of time or you'll come across moments where previously you were making great progress and you're really happy, and then all of a sudden you're doing the same thing, you haven't changed it, but the rate of progress that you're seeing on average starts to decline. And it's at this point you might want to consider making a change. Now the reason this happens is for several different reasons, and it's very context dependent. But for example, the biggest one is if you start off a diet at 80 kilos, then the amount of calories you burn from doing things like going on a walk and doing your cardio and doing your workouts, whatever it is, the amount of calories you burn when you're 80 kilos is going to be more than when you lose 10 kilos or however many kilos. The more weight you lose, the smaller of a vehicle you become, therefore the less calories you burn. And this means that over time, you might need to lower your calories slightly in order to accommodate for this change. There's a couple other examples of why rates of progress can start to slow down. Number one is throughout a fat loss diet, when you're doing extra cardio and you're pushing yourself to be more active than usual, or maybe you're just applying yourself more and you're underfeeding the body, which is what a calorie deficit is, then this accumulates diet fatigue. It accumulates fatigue. And if you're not careful and knowing when to rest and when to hold back and when to not push too hard, give yourself a break essentially, then what will happen is you can accumulate too much fatigue in a bit more of a short-term sense, and that can mean that your metabolic rate can start to decline massively until you wash off that fatigue. So that can be a thing as well when you want to make changes. Now, a third example is when you diet for a long time and you're essentially underfeeding the body, then you will experience a downregulation of your metabolic rate as well, because the less calories you give your body, the less calories your body then adapts to essentially churn through. Now there's more technical descriptions but for the simplicity of this video, that's essentially what's happening. So there's a few major reasons why you might achieve a certain rate of loss in the beginning of a fat loss phase or a fat loss diet or a fat loss pursuit, but then over time you're doing the same thing, and the rate of progress you're seeing just genuinely slows down. So we need to know how to know when to make changes. And this ultimately comes down to what form of data collection that you've opted for in terms of marking progress. Now, in terms of marking progress, when it comes to fat loss, we probably want to be taking physique pictures quite regularly. I would say in the same lighting, from the same angles, once a week would be fantastic. That's usually recommended. And then week to week, you can compare. And once you start to see no difference, and you also notice, oh, I wasn't really that hungry this week, and then the scales also haven't really been going down, let me check my pictures, and then you see no difference, okay, cool, it might be time to make a change. Whether that change is increasing cardio, maybe going on an additional walk a day, maybe adding a workout a week, maybe reducing your calories by 100, whatever it is, generally small tweaks are recommended, whatever it is, that could be your sign to make a change. Now, let's say you're not taking physique pictures, which I strongly recommend against. Let's say you're only checking the scales, then a really bad thing to do is see a daily fluctuation, because that happens with the scales, and decide to change your approach even slightly based on day-to-day fluctuations. You need to understand that the scales fluctuate for a million different reasons outside of fat loss, and they're very unreliable when it comes to comparing day-to-day weigh-ins. That's just the way it is. It's completely normal for your scales to be above your baseline weight by 2 kg or below by 2 kg or up to. That's totally normal. So if they're fluctuating on a day-to-day basis, you don't like what you see one day, you have a negative emotional reaction, you get annoyed, and you take action and make a decision on the back of that, then that is your fault for not containing your emotions. Now, on the other hand, what I would recommend doing is weigh yourself more frequently, ideally 5 to 7 days a week. Doesn't have to be, but in an ideal world, this will give you an average across the week that you can calculate across the readings. And this, when you compare that to previous week's average or next week's average, comparing week to week averages is a much more accurate way of doing things. And if we start to see a decline in the rate of progress that you're experiencing from comparing your week to week averages over time, you're noticing a negative trend that you don't like, and you feel like you've got room to push. You know, you're eating 2,500 calories, but you don't feel too restricted. You're enjoying the process. You know, you're not feeling too hungry, maybe a little bit, but not too bad. Reduce it to 2,400. That can be a viable option. So that's the scenario if you're data collection would be the scales. On the other hand, you've got body measurements. Now, when it comes to body measurements, I would always, one, go off feel in terms of the way you felt throughout the week, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. In terms of the body measurements, if you're taking them every single week, try and be super consistent with them. If you're going to measure your waist at any point, make sure it's the exact height up on your torso every single time. If you're going to measure your leg, it's the same every time, so on and so forth, okay? So we want to be accurately collecting, or as accurate as possible, measurements from certain body parts that's consistent, probably once a week. Once a week is generally recommended. You can do more, but I don't think things change enough to do it any more frequently or justify a higher frequency. So let's say you're going to do it consistently for once a week, and you're starting to notice that, let's say a few weeks ago, every single week you were noticing a small decline in, or a small reduction in the size of your circumference measurements, wherever you're taking them from. And let's say you've also opted to take weekly physique pictures and you're also not seeing too much change. And then going back to what I was saying, you do the feel test and you also notice that I'm not too hungry this week and I haven't felt too like I've been lacking necessarily, like my body's been lacking and asking for more back in terms of food. And you're also not seeing progress from your forms of data collection. It might be time to make a change. So there's a million different opportunities or reasons that justify making a change. But we want to do it based on logic. So first of all, you want to essentially look at your form of data collection, whether that be checking circumference measurements, checking the scales, checking physique pictures, and you want to be doing it accurately. If it's the scales, we're taking weekly averages. If it's physique pictures, it's the same pose, in the same lighting, let's say with the same amount or lack of clothes on, the same everything, every single week, the same day of the week, same idea with the circumference measurements. We're thinking about accuracy of data collection. And if you've got at least two, which is always recommended, at least two forms of data collection, because you can't always trust one for a lot of different reasons that I can go into in a separate video. If you're seeing signs that you should push harder and you're seeing a decline in progress, making a small tweak, increasing how much cardio you're doing ever so slightly, going on a small daily walk, additional walk a day, maybe adding a workout in, maybe doing something, reducing your calories by 100, some small tweak. We're just toggling dials in order to just keep moving at a desired pace, essentially. Now, if you can do that, you can do a good job, that's fantastic. But what I would definitely recommend against is making decisions based on emotional reactions on a day-to-day basis, or speeding up your process just because you fancy getting it done faster, and actually failing to recognize that there's a certain rate of starving yourself or overworking yourself that you thought you could sustain, but trust me, your body will fight back. So as long as you're not doing anything reckless or idiotic and you're accurately collecting data in a way that makes sense, and you're referring to that over time and being patient, and then when it comes to making decisions, it's only a small change, that's usually the best way in order to keep you on track, but also maintain your desired level of sustainability, which should be maximum relative to you. So hope this helps. If you've got any questions, drop it in the box. I'll see you in the next one.